How's everybody doing today? Hotep, hey, this is Michael M. Hotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. It is Sunday, May 22nd, 2022, and we are live. I want to come on for a few minutes and talk some about a New York Times series that I saw today dealing with Haiti and the Haitian Revolution, and also do a brief overview of a 10-week online course that I teach on Sundays from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. And we'll teach another session of that class today, right after we finish this broadcast here. Normally I do it on Sundays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the Haitian Revolution is one of the things that I talk about in the class. The Haitian Revolution, the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, those are all directly connected. The U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power movement, we deal with all that. But the Haitian Revolution and the Louisiana Purchase, where the U.S. gets 828,000 square miles of land from France for $15 million because France is trying to raise money because they're going almost bankrupt fighting against the Haitians in the Haitian Revolution. All this is connected. So I want to look at, first, I'm going to show you some of the slides in the online class that I teach, but I want to look briefly here at one of the huge articles that the New York Times has that came out May 20th, 2022, okay? Demanding reparations and ending up in exile. Demanding reparations and ending up in exile. This deals with John Bertrand Aristide, who was president of Haiti in 2003. But this also ties to the fact that France forced Haiti with the threat of another war to pay reparations to France. Okay, France demanded 150 million francs, which in Haiti ended up paying $560 million in today's dollars to France in reparations for the Haitian Revolution. But if we look at this quickly here, this is some fantastic reporting done by the New York Times. Constant Mayot, Catherine Porter, Salim Gebrekadan, and Matt Apuzzo. But John Bertrand Aristide, who in 2003 was the president of Haiti, and he was the first democratically elected president of Haiti. He said this was during he was on stage. This was during an event that was taking place. And he said Haiti deserves reparations from France, basically. He said reparation boomed John Bertrand Aristide, Haiti's firebrand president, to the cheers of the farmers and workers and students in the crowd. Okay, reparation, Haiti's firebrand president, to the cheers of the farmers, workers, and students in the crowd. The French ambassador, sitting on stage, hid his alarm behind an awkward smile. He knew John Bertrand Aristide well enough. He knew John Bertrand Aristide well enough to expect barbs at Haiti's former French colonizers and slave masters. But on April 7th, 2003, the president suddenly started calling for reparations. President John Bertrand Aristide suddenly started calling for reparations. A bombshell that became a hallmark of his presidency. And diplomats now concede part of his undoing. Diplomats now concede that was part of his downfall and undoing, and while he was taken out of power by France and the U.S. government. Now, the French ambassador said we had to try to diffuse it. We had to try to diffuse it. Yves Goodall said of John Bertrand Aristide's call for reparations, calling it an explosive. Okay, here's a drawing of John Bertrand Aristide and Yves Goodall. So, with his remarks, President John Bertrand Aristide tried to excavate a history that remains all but buried in France. Long after the Haitians threw off their shackles in the Haitian Revolution in 1791 to 1803, Haitians declared their independence January 1st, 1804. Long after the Haitians threw off their shackles, beat Napoleon's forces, Napoleon Bonaparte, beat Napoleon's forces, and won their independence 2 centuries ago, France came back with warships and an unheard of demand. France came back with warships and an unheard of demand that Haitians pay astounding amounts of money to their former slave masters or face war again. France forced Haiti to pay France reparations for the Haitian Revolution and the damage that Haiti did to France. Well, you were the ones enslaving the Haitians. You were the ones enslaving these Africans. Here's a picture of former President John Bertrand Aristide. So Haiti became the first and only nation to pay reparations to its former masters and their descendants for generations. According to, let me back up here. Okay. According to a New York Times analysis of thousands of pages of archival documents, Haiti shipped the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars to France. This is one of the main reasons why Haiti is so poor today. And it's been poor for decades, of course. It shipped the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars to France, setting off a cycle of perpetual debt that sapped Haiti's ability to build a nation for more than 100 years. Setting off a cycle of perpetual debt that sapped Haiti's ability to build a nation for more than 100 years. Yet to this day, the history is not taught in French schools. And many of the country's most prominent aristocratic families are unaware that their ancestors kept collecting payments from Haiti's poorest people, long after the end of slavery. Now, President John Bertrand Aristide, Haiti's first democratically elected president after decades of dictatorship, wanted France to do far more than acknowledge its past. He wanted restitution. President John Bertrand Aristide said, "What beautiful schools, universities, and hospitals we will be able to build for our children," he told the crowd. How much food we will have in abundance. Now, the consequences were immediate and lasting. In interviews that the New York Times did, a dozen French and Haitian political figures recounted how worried France worked quickly and doggedly to stifle President John Bertrand Aristide's call for reparations before siding with his opponents and collaborating with the United States to remove him from power. Okay? Before siding with his opponents and collaborating with the United States to remove him from power. They also have 6 takeaways, the reparations Haitians paid to former slave holders. We'll look at that briefly in just a minute. And I'm going to give you an overview of our class, because we deal with Haiti and the Louisiana Purchase, the Haitian Revolution and the Louisiana Purchase in the 10-week online course that I teach, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. Because we open with that. That's how we start the class, because all this history is connected. Okay, I'm gonna post a link here for the course. You can register for it, because I'm gonna teach another session of the course as soon as we finish this broadcast. Normally we do it on Sundays, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but I'm running behind today, so you'll be able to join us in class today. And we do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. It's a 10-week online class that I teach at our online school. Okay, now, France and the United States have long said that President John Bertrand Aristide's call for restitution had nothing to do with his ouster, that he had taken an autocratic turn, lost control of the country, and was spirited into exile to prevent Haiti, already heaving with turmoil, from careening into chaos. But France's ambassador to Haiti at the time, Thierry Burkhardt, conceded in an interview that France and the United States had effectively orchestrated a coup against President John Bertrand Aristide. Okay, France's ambassador to Haiti at the time, Thierry Burkhardt, conceded in an interview that France and the United States had effectively orchestrated a coup against President John Bertrand Aristide, and that his abrupt removal was, quote, probably a bit about his call for reparations from France too. Probably a bit about his call for reparations from France too. So Thierry Burkhardt, ambassador to France ambassador to Haiti at the time, Thierry Burkhardt said, it made our job easier to dismiss the reparations claims without Mr. Aristide in office. It made our job easier to dismiss the reparations claims without John Bertrand Aristide in office. So the showdown underscores how 2 centuries after France forced Haitians to pay their former slave masters, okay, 2 centuries after France forced Haitians to pay their former slave masters for the liberty they had already won in battle, the effects continued to ripple through the politics of both countries. By calling for restitution. Now, it's important to understand, and we deal with this in the class also, it's important to understand, right? Haiti, well, or on the island of Hispaniola, that was originally conquered in 1492 by Christopher Columbus. So you have the Spanish who had control of the island of Hispaniola first. Haiti is on the western third of the island. Then in 1697, France takes over the western third of the island from Spain. Okay, so that Haiti, they were victimized by both the Spanish and the French. But it starts with Columbus and the Spanish crown. By calling for restitution, Haiti, a nation born from what historians call the world's first most successful slave rebellion, struck at France's national identity as a beacon of human rights, and threatened to inspire others with historical grievances against France to follow its lead from the Caribbean to Africa. Okay, they threatened to inspire others with historical grievances against France to follow its lead from the Caribbean to Africa. Now, this is a illustration depicting the Haitians fighting against the French in 1791, the Haitian Revolution. Now, Goodall said uh, we were very disdainful of Haiti. We were very disdainful of Haiti. What I think we will never forgive Haiti for deep down is that it is the country that beat us. Okay. It's the country that defeated the French. He's saying what I think we will never forgive Haiti for deep down is that it is the country that beat us. Well, that's because you were enslaving them. And you were exploiting their labor and treating them inhumanely, and they fought back. It's not like they went to your country and did that to you. No, you took over from the Spanish, okay, and you kept bringing in African slaves, and you're treating them inhumanely and exploiting their labor and creating untold wealth for France, and they fought back. I mean, the U.S. was born out of revolution, the American Revolution, 1775 to 1783, against King George III and Great Britain. Even after John Bertrand Aristide's removal in 2004, the calls for restitution have continued to reverberate, leading to a stunning concession more than a decade later by Francois Hollande, France's president, who referred to the money Haiti was forced to hand over as, quote, the ransom of independence, the ransom of independence. Since then, scholars have increasingly explored the history of Haiti's payments. Just this past December 2021, at a conference on the grounds of the French Finance Ministry, one of the most prominent French historians on relations between the two countries, John Francois Breyer, called the payments a form of quote unquote meta slavery, a form of meta slavery that prevented Haiti from breaking free of France long after independence. He said all French people are affected by the nation's past in Haiti. Okay, said Jean-Marc Ayrault, a former French prime minister. Yet he said French students don't learn about it and few officials discuss it. He said all French people are affected by the nation's past in Haiti. He said French students don't learn about it and few officials discuss it. He said it's never taught, is never explained. And this is largely why France has the wealth that it has today. Okay, so read the rest of this here. Okay, so and they have 3 like huge articles from the New York Times on this. Demanding reparations and ending up in exile. Okay, the New York Times, May 20th, 2022. This is dealing with the history of Haiti. And this is something that we deal with in the class. When I started reading this morning, I said, wow, I'm teaching this class today also. So I said, we're going to talk about this some in the class, and we'll probably talk about it this week on the African History Network show as well. So another article that they have from the New York Times, this one here came out May 20th also. Now, we know May 18th was Haitian Flag Day, right? Because May 18th, 1803 commemorates May 18th, May 1803, where during the Haitian Revolution, they adopted the Haitian flag. Okay, so that's what May 18th, 1803, but that's why Haitian Flag Day is May 18th. Okay, there's a good article on this. Is a good short article from Caribbean National Weekly. So if you saw like some Facebook posts from some of you, or social media posts from some of your friends that have a Haitian background, okay, on May 18th, and they were talking about Haitian Flag Day. Okay, that's what that deals with. So Caribbean National Weekly. Now this article is from 2020, but May 18th, and it talks about Happy Haitian Flag Day. Okay, and The origins of the holiday. So Toussaint Louverture was captured by the French in 1803. After Jean-Jacques Dessalines and other leaders, let's see if we can increase the size of this. After Jean-Jacques Dessalines and other leaders decided to continue the fight and march on what is now Port-au-Prince in Haiti, they wanted to carry a flag that would represent their troops. On May 18th, 1803, they pieced together a design for the official flag. Since then, May 18th has been known as Haitian Flag Day. May 18th is known as Haitian Flag Day. The design of the new flag began with the French flag made of blue, white, and red bands. The white band was removed to indicate that the French no longer controlled the colony, okay, of Haiti. A woman named Catherine Flon, F-L-O-N, sewed the new flag together using vertical bands of blue and red cloth. Blue represented blacks and mixed race people, and red symbolized their blood. Okay. Over the years, the nation's flag has been modified several times, but Flag Day itself has remained the same as the day the nation's flag was first sewn together. May 18th is a major national holiday in Haiti. Okay, so check that out. And this is from CaribbeanNationalWeekly.com. All right, so if we just very quickly look at this, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of the 10-week online class that I teach, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968, because this is some of what we deal with in the class, because we deal with the Haitian Revolution and the Louisiana Purchase and show how they are connected, because of the Louisiana Purchase and the U.S. doubling its territory, this increased the need for African slave labor here in the U.S. This increased the need for African slave labor here in the U.S. But if we just look at this quickly here, 6 takeaways about Haiti's reparations to France. This is from May 20th, 2022 from the New York Times. This is part of that series that they did. I just want to look at page 3 right here. The double debt that started it all. The double debt that started it all. Okay. And this deals with 1825, when a French warship bristling with cannons sailed into the port of the Haitian capital in 1825. An emissary from King Charles X came ashore and delivered an astonishing demand. France wanted reparations from the people it had enslaved, the Haitians. France wanted reparations from the people it had enslaved, okay, the Haitians. Ordinarily, the defeated are the ones who pay reparations, not the victors, okay? But not in this case here. Just a decade earlier, France had been forced to pay reparations to its European neighbors after the failed military campaigns of Napoleon, the very emperor whose forces were also defeated by the Haitians. But Haiti was virtually alone in the world with no powerful allies. It was fearful of being invaded and eager to establish trade with other nations, so it agreed to pay. Also, France threatened to go to war with Haiti again if they didn't pay reparations. Now, the demand was for 150 million French francs to be turned over in 5 annual payments, far more than Haiti could pay. So France pushed Haiti to take a loan from a group of French banks to start paying. That Sisyphean weight came to be known as the double debt. The double debt. Haiti had to pay France, and then Haiti had to pay back the loan to a group of French banks. Now, the true cost to Haiti then and today, the New York Times tracked each payment Haiti made over the course of 64 years. In all, the payments added up to about $560 million in today's dollars. But the loss to Haiti cannot just be measured by adding up how much was paid to France and to outside lenders over the years. Okay, the loss to Haiti cannot just be measured by adding up how much was paid to France and to outside lenders over the years. Every franc ship or ship from France, French ship, every franc ship, I'm sorry, back up. They're talking about their monetary system. They're talking about their currency, francs. Okay, every franc shipped across the Atlantic took to an overseas bank vault was a franc not circulating among Haiti's farmers, laborers, and merchants. Every franc shipped, the French currency, across the Atlantic to an overseas bank, a European bank, a French bank, was a franc not circulating among Haiti's farmers, laborers, and merchants, or not being invested in bridges, schools, or factories. The sort of expenditures that help nations become nations, that enable them to prosper. Now, after reviewing thousands of pages of archival documents, some centuries old, and consulting with 15 of the world's leading economists, this is New York Times talking, the New York Times correspondents calculated, their correspondents for the New York Times calculated that the payments to France cost Haiti from $21 billion to $115 billion in lost economic growth over time. Okay. After consulting with 15 of the world's leading economists, their correspondents, New York Times correspondents, calculated that the payments to France that Haiti was forced to make cost Haiti from $21 billion to $115 billion in lost economic growth over time. That is as much as 8 times the size of Haiti's entire economy in 2020. Neocolonialism through debt is how Thomas Piketty, I think that's how you Piketty, one of the economists we spoke with, put it. This drain has totally disrupted the process of state building, he said. Neocolonialism through debt. And that was only the beginning. The double debt helped push Haiti into a cycle of debts that hobbled the country for more than 100 years. And that was only the beginning. The double debt helped push Haiti into a cycle of debts that hobbled the country for more than 100 years. Okay, so you can read the rest of this because they talk about the French banks, and this right here, the French bank that struck gold, right? The French government sapped Haiti with its demand for reparations. Okay, but in later years, the French approached Haiti with a different tactic: the outstretched hand of a business partner. After half a century of crushing payments tied to the double debt, Haitians celebrated the news that at last the country would have its own national bank. Okay, would have its own national bank. But the sort of institution that in Europe had financed railroads and factories. Okay. However, the National Bank of Haiti was Haitian in name only. It was of Credit Industriel et Commercial, which was a Paris based bank commonly known as CIC, and its investors. It was actually a Paris based bank, commonly known as CIC, and its investors. They controlled Haiti's national bank from Paris and took a commission on nearly every transaction the Haitian government made. Okay. Now, if we go to, hold on, it's just one quick thing I want to show you here, looking at this article, page 8. Okay, this right here. U.S. treated Haiti like a cash register because the Marines invaded in 1915. Okay, here's a picture of it here. The American military in Haiti in 1915. Okay, the U.S. treated. Where is that here? Okay, it's right below the picture. There we go. The U.S. treated Haiti like a cash register. When the American military invaded Haiti in the summer of 1915, so this is during World War I, which is 1914 to 1918, but the U.S. doesn't get involved in World War I until 1917. Okay, and this is at the beginning of the Great Migration of African Americans migrating from the South up north and out west. Okay, so when the American military invaded Haiti summer of 1915, the official explanation was that Haiti was too poor and too unstable to be left on its own devices. The official explanation was that Haiti was too poor and too unstable to be left to its own devices. U.S. Secretary of State Robert Lansing made little effort to mask his contempt for the African race, quote unquote, African race, casting the occupation as a civilizing mission intended to end, quote, anarchy, savagery, and oppression, end quote. But a hint of other motives had come the winter before, when a small team of Marines entered Haiti's national bank and strolled out with $500,000 in gold. A hint of other motives had come the winter before, when a small team of Marines, U.S. Marines, entered Haiti's national bank and walked out with $500,000 in gold from Haiti's national bank. Within days, it was in the vault of a Wall Street bank. Now, quote, you had the general who led the U.S. forces in Haiti said years later, describing himself as a racketeer for capitalism. He said, "I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues." Now, National City Bank was the predecessor of Citigroup Bank. National City Bank was the predecessor of Citigroup Bank, and along with other powers on Wall Street, it pushed Washington to seize control of Haiti and its finances. Washington, D.C. It pushed Washington, D.C. to seize control of Haiti and its finances, according to decades of diplomatic correspondence, financial reports, and archival records reviewed by the New York Times. For decades to come, the United States was the dominant power in Haiti, dissolving parliament at gunpoint, killing thousands, and shipping a big portion of Haiti's earnings to bankers in New York City, while the farmers who helped generate the profits often lived near starvation. Some historians cite tangible gains for Haiti during the U.S. occupation, like hospitals 800 miles of roads, and a more efficient civil service. But they also point to the American use of forced labor, with U.S. soldiers tying up workers in ropes, making Haitians build roads for no pay, and shooting those who tried to flee. Shooting those who tried to flee. For a decade, a quarter of Haiti's total revenue went to paying debts controlled by National City Bank here in the U.S., which became Citigroup Bank, and its affiliates, according to nearly 24 annual reports prepared by American officials and reviewed by the New York Times. At times, the American officers who controlled Haiti's finances spent more of its money paying their own salaries and expenses than on public health for the entire country of about 2 million people. Okay, so read the rest of this piece here, because I printed this up. This is 12 pages. Okay, that was on page 7 and 8. The U.S. treated Haiti like a cash register. That was on page 7 and 8. Okay, this is part of the huge series that the New York Times just released. 6 takeaways about Haiti's reparations to France. How did the modern world's most successful slave revolt give birth to a desperately poor nation? Here is a summary of what a team of New York Times correspondents found out. All right, so I was looking at this morning, and I said, wow, because I deal with this in the online course that I teach, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. So if you watch the African History Network show, you've heard me talk about it. I teach this class on Sundays, normally 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm gonna teach the class right after I finish this broadcast here shortly, because I'm running late today, and I have to do my radio show at 9 p.m. tonight, Sunday, 9 p.m. From the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power. And we start in 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase and the Haitian Revolution, because those two are connected. And we deal with history chronologically to see what leads up to the Civil War taking place. We deal with Reconstruction, 1865, 1877, Jim Crow era, Great Migration, 1915, 1970, World War I, World War II, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power movement. So it's a 10-week online class that I teach. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. So you can register for the class. We have some archived content. You can watch last week's class. You can join us in class today. You can join us in today's class also. Okay. And even after the course is over with, you can go back and watch it anytime. So a year from now, 2 years from now, you'll be able to you can go back and watch the entire class. It's archived. I'm going to do a quick overview here and deal with some of the information that we do within the class. And I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, articles, video clips to understand what happened to us after slavery ended, how we got into the predicament that we're in now, to understand where we need to go from here, because we have to understand how all this is connected. Okay, historical events don't happen in a vacuum. They are the culmination of a sequence of historical events that lead up to other events taking place. Okay, so the attacks on critical race theory, these anti-critical race theory laws, we saw how it complicated some lessons in schools during African American History Month. This article right here from Axios.com, new rules are limiting how teachers can teach Black History Month. The attacks on critical race theory, the attacks on the 1619 Project, even some type of backlash dealing with Juneteenth, history, teaching about the history of slavery in schools, teaching about white supremacy, racism. All this is connected to the Civil War and Reconstruction. And this is a whole backlash to try to take us back before the 1964 Civil Rights Movement, before the Civil Rights Act, take us really back to the 1890 Mississippi State Convention, where they rewrote the state constitution to oppose poll taxes and literacy tests. This article here from USA Today from, I think this was in 2021, mock slave auctions, racist lessons, how U.S. history class often traumatizes and dehumanizes Black students. You have this one right here. Republican state lawmakers want to punish schools that teach the 1619 Project. USA Today also. This article here from June 2021 dealing with Juneteenth, right? 60% of most Americans know little or nothing about Juneteenth poll finds. Americans are very ignorant of history and very ignorant of law. Okay, and all this comes together. So when we try to get our issues and concerns addressed that come from a historical context, many of the people that we're talking to are ignorant. All right. This article here from the New York Times deals with how 60% of Americans know little or nothing about Juneteenth. I would say a lot of what they know about Juneteenth is false also. All right. So when we look at the Louisiana Purchase, because we start the class out with the Louisiana Purchase, and the U.S. gets, of 1803, the U.S. gets 828,000 square miles of land for less than 3 cents an acre from France. Okay, because France is fighting the Haitian Revolution. This doubled the size of the U.S. at the time. This is one of the most significant things that Thomas Jefferson is credited with. Okay, because he signed the Louisiana Purchase. What was known at the time as the Louisiana Territory stretched from the Mississippi River in the east to the Rocky Mountains in the west, and the Gulf of Mexico in the south to the Canadian border in the north. Part or all of 15 states were eventually created from the land deal, which is considered one of the most important achievements of Thomas Jefferson's presidency. Okay, history.com has some good information on the Louisiana Purchase. Here's a map of the Louisiana Territory. We see it here in the middle of the U.S. Louisiana Purchase, 1803 Louisiana Territory. We see the Oregon Country Territory over to my left. We see the territory, there's Texas and all that, going out west, the lower southern portion. That was all controlled by Spain at this time in 1803. Okay, and then Florida was under Spanish control as well. We know that the U.S. gets control of Spain about 1821. It gets control of Florida from Spain about 1821. All right. And we know that the Spanish come to the U.S. about 1513 when Juan Garrido, the Spanish conquistador, comes into Florida along with Juan Ponce de Leon. Juan Garrido, the African, born in West Africa about 1480, comes into Florida in 1513 with the Spanish conquistador Juan Ponce de Leon. So we look at the Louisiana Purchase and see how it's related to the Haitian Revolution. And if we look at things leading up to the U.S. Civil War taking place, right? The Texas gaining its independence in 1836, Mexican-American War, 1846-1848, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, 1848, where the U.S. gets Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, California, Utah, and Nevada from Mexico as a result of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And then you look at the Compromise of 1850, which organizes the land that the U.S. gets from Mexico. The Compromise of 1850 consisted of 5 bills. One of those bills was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. The Fugitive Slave Act is tied to Article 4, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, and that laid the foundation for the Fugitive Slave Act of 1790, signed by President George Washington, and the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Okay, now, the U.S. Civil War in the United States starts April 12, 1861, precipitated by Abraham Lincoln becoming president-elect November 1860, and December 20th, 1860, South Carolina becomes the first state to secede from the Union, all right, because they think Lincoln's going to free the slaves. Now, the Civil War in the United States began in 1861 after decades of simmering tensions between northern and southern states over slavery, states' rights, and westward expansion, over slavery, states' rights, and westward expansion. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 caused 7 Southern states to secede and form the CSA, Confederate States of America. 4 more states soon joined. The war between the states, as the Civil War was known, ended in Confederate surrender in 1865. April 9th, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrenders to General Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. However, the Civil War is going to officially come to an end, and it really officially comes to an end in August 1866. The reason why is Robert E. Lee's army was the largest Confederate army, but it was not the only Confederate army. And there were smaller Confederate armies that still existed after Robert E. Lee surrendered. In terms of the terms of surrender had to be negotiated with each one of those individual armies as well. So it officially comes to an end August 1866. Now, the war between the conflict was the costliest and deadliest war ever fought on American soil, with some 620,000 of 2.4 million soldiers killed, millions more injured, and much of the South left in ruin. Okay, then we look at the Reconstruction era, 1865 to 1877, which is not taught very much in schools. This is a crucial period of history because African Americans were making advances. And then the Reconstruction comes to an end with the backroom deal between Republicans and Democrats to allow Rutherford B. Hayes to become president, and he'll remove the remaining Union troops out of the South who were enforcing the laws and the new rights African Americans had, enforcing that to a certain extent. And this allowed the white supremacists in the South to fully take back control of Southern government, state government, local government, all of this, and really impose what we call Jim Crow laws. So the Reconstruction era, 1865, 1877, for a period of for a 14-year period, the U.S. government took steps to try and integrate the nation's newly freed Black population into society. Okay, and you're going to have you're going to have about 2,000 African Americans who become elected officials, African American men who become elected officials during Reconstruction as well. The majority of the state legislature in South Carolina was African American men during Reconstruction. You have a U.S. senator out of Mississippi in 1870, Hiram Rhodes Revels. He's the only African American U.S. senator that has come out of Mississippi. Okay, Mississippi has not had an African American U.S. senator since Reconstruction, which is crazy. And Mississippi has one of the highest populations of African Americans in the country. Okay, so we're going to see these types of advances that we're making during Reconstruction, and we're going to see all this largely get reversed. Okay, after Reconstruction ends and the Jim Crow era. All right, now, and I posted a link here. You can register for this 10-week online class. You can join us in class today after this broadcast. And then we have some archived. You can watch last week's class also because it's archived. All right, now, between 1863 and 1877, the U.S. government undertook the task of integrating nearly 4 million formerly enslaved people into society after the Civil War bitterly divided the country over the issue of slavery. A white slave-holding South that had built the economy and culture on slave labor was now forced by its defeat in a war that claimed 620,000 lives to change its economic, political, and social relations with African Americans. Okay, now there's a good article. Like I said, we talk about the Mexican-American War. We talk about the which is important to understand because these are things that lead up to the Civil War taking place. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. As a result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Republican Party was formed in 1854 by groups of abolitionists, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed because you had fierce opposition in Congress And the Kansas-Nebraska Act dealt with leaving it up to the people moving out to the Kansas-Nebraska territory to determine whether or not they wanted to have slavery, as opposed to it being dictated by the federal government. And this, a lot of abolitionists were furious by this. The anti-slavery movement, they were furious by this because they wanted to reduce the number of territories that had slavery. Okay, and this leads to armed conflict in Kansas called Bleeding Kansas, which is about from 1855 to 1859. Bleeding Kansas. Okay, we deal with things like Manifest Destiny, 1845. Special Field Order number 15, 40 Acres and a Mule, Juneteenth, and really explaining what Juneteenth is, separating fact from fiction, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. 13th Amendment is based upon the main architect of the 13th Amendment was Senator Lynn Trumbull, is based upon what's known as the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Contrary to the language dealing with neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall be duly convicted. Okay, that comes from the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. That law already applied to white men. They're giving African Americans the same rights that white men had, especially African American men. That wasn't to re-enslave African Americans, anything like that. That's giving them the same rights that white people had. All right, that research, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, that's where that comes from. No, it did not re-enslave African Americans. That comes from a very poor understanding of history. This is one of the problems with Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th. The premise is false. No, the 13th Amendment did not re-enslave people. That's just nonsense. I interviewed Dr. Darrell Scott, history professor from Howard University, on my show for 2 hours, and he teaches a class at Howard dealing with from slavery to mass incarceration. We went through and dispelled all that nonsense. We did the 14th Amendment, 1868 as well. We talk about people like Sarah Rector, who was the richest Afro-American girl in the early 1900s, and she and her family got land because of the Black Freedmen Indian Treaties of 1866 and the Dawes Allotment Act of 1887. Oil was discovered on her land. She became a millionaire. This is in Oklahoma, and her family was of Creek Indian slave ancestry. Okay, they had enslaved Creek Indian ancestry because the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, Cherokee, and Seminole Indians all owned African slaves, and we know Tulsa, Oklahoma, was founded by Creek Indians about 1834. When the what are known as the 5 civilized tribes of Native Americans, when they get kicked off of their land in southeastern United States, they all go out west on what's known as the Trail of Tears, and they take their African slaves with them. A third of the people who were on the Trail of Tears were African people. Okay, so this ties into this history in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Black Wall Street was, the Greenwood district, North Tulsa. That was founded by Creek Indians around 1834. The word Tulsa comes from the Creek Indian word Tallahassee. I've done a 2.5-hour lecture dealing with the history of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I've done a lot of in Black Wall Street. So I've done a lot of research on that. And a lot of your early African American landowners, in Tulsa got land because of those Indian treaties, those Black Freedmen Indian treaties. If you look at the article here very quickly, and then I want to show you this one here from Time Magazine. We're going to get out of here so I can teach this class. If you look at this article from history.com, which is the official website of the History Channel, 9 entrepreneurs who helped build Tulsa's Black Wall Street, from May 14th, 2021 by Alexis Clark. 9 entrepreneurs who helped build Tulsa's Black Wall Street. Before the Tulsa Race Massacre, the city's African American district thrived as a community of business leaders and visionaries. Okay, so if we look at this very quickly here, they quote Hannibal B. Johnson, who's one of the top historians, comes to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Black Wall Street. Before the Greenwood District, and that was the business district that started at the intersection of Greenwood Arch and Pine. This is where it's believed the Gap Band gets their name from, Gap, G-A-P, Greenwood, Arch, and Pine, because they're from Tulsa, Oklahoma. You know, you dropped a bomb on me and burn rubber, Charlie Wilson, things like this, the Gap Band. Okay, so before the Greenwood District was established, African Americans came to Oklahoma in the mid-19th century as slaves of the 5 civilized tribes of Native Americans, the term used for the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole Native American tribes. They were forced from their lands in the southeast part of the United States, resettling in Oklahoma, then known as Indian Territory. After the Civil War, under the treaties, under the terms of the treaties of 1866, these African Americans were emancipated, with some integrating into the tribes. Now, this is something Dr. Claude Anderson has been talking about. He's one of my teachers. I know him personally. When I was doing my research on Tulsa, Oklahoma, back in about 2014, something like that, I called him and I said that the Black Freedmen Indian treaties tie into the history of Tulsa, Oklahoma, because at the time he didn't know that. We talked about this. I was preparing for a lecture and an interview dealing with this, all this, and I was explaining to him the connection between the two. After the Civil War, under the terms of the treaties of 1866, these African Americans were emancipated, with some integrating into the tribes, a relationship that would later provide freedmen with their own land, a relationship that would later provide freedmen with their own land. Now, Hannibal B. Johnson, who's the author, his new book is Black Wall Street 100, an American City Grapples with its historical racial trauma. And he's also the author of this book here that I read for preparation to do my lectures and things like this, dealing with the history of Black Wall Street. This is the first book he wrote on Black Wall Street. This was one of the first real history books dealing with Black Wall Street. This came out in I think it first came out in 1998, and then there was a revision that he did. Okay, this book here, copyright 1998, and I think there was I think he did a revision or something like this. This came out in 1998. Black Wall Street, From Riot to Renaissance in Tulsa's Historic Greenwood District, one of the best books that you'll read dealing with the history of Black Wall Street, by Hannibal B. Johnson. So this is who they're quoting right here. He's one of the top historians when it comes to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Black Wall Street. He said the relative wealth of some Black folks in Oklahoma comes in part through their connection to the tribes, Native American tribes, and land ownership. The relative wealth of some Black folks in Oklahoma comes in part through their connection to the tribes and their land ownership, says Hannibal B. Johnson, historian and author of Black Wall Street 100, an American City Grapples with its Historical Racial Trauma. The Dawes Act, the Dawes Allotment Act of 1877, which redistributed 138 million acres of land. The majority of it is supposed to go to Native Americans and Black Indians, things like that. 2/3 went to white people. This is where you get the $5 Indian from. White people learned about this, and you had to anglicize your name to have your name added to the Dawes rolls. This is one of the requirements. So white people, Europeans here, paid $5 to have their names added to the Dawes rolls so they can get this land. The Dawes Act of 1887 authorized the government to divide tribal territories into allotments for individual Native Americans, which included Black members. This is how Sarah Rector and her family gets the money, gets the land. As word spread that Indian Territory was a safer place for African Americans to settle between 1865 and 1920, more than 50 Black townships were founded in Oklahoma. So when the Tulsa Race Massacre happens June 1st, 1921, and Tulsa is largely destroyed. The North Tulsa is largely destroyed. We rebuilt Black Wall Street. We rebuilt the Greenwood District. We rebuilt North Tulsa with our own dollars and the help of the surrounding Black townships. That's the most magnificent part of this story that does not get told. Hannibal B. Johnson deals with this in his book, and I talk about this in my lectures. Black Wall Street, from riot to Renaissance in Tulsa's historic Greenwood District. From riot to Renaissance, he deals with us resurrecting it as well. In about 1926, Dr. W.B. Du Bois visited North Tulsa, and he talks about how it was thriving again, and they had businesses back and things like this. This was in 1926. This is 5 years after the race massacre. Okay, so read this article here from history.com, 9 entrepreneurs who helped build Tulsa's Black Wall Street. Okay, then you have this one here, also from history.com. This deals with, because we talk about this in my class, this deals with the Louisiana Purchase. The Louisiana Purchase was driven by a slave rebellion, and it deals with the connection between the Louisiana Purchase and the Haitian Revolution, and how the Louisiana Purchase increased the need for African slave labor here in this country, because it doubled the territory of the U.S. at the time, which increased the need in some of those territories. The U.S. carves out about 15 states out of the land they get from France, and in some of those states they're going to have slave labor, but they're going to have slavery. But the purchase was also fueled by a slave revolt in Haiti, and tragically, it ended up expanding slavery in the United States. Okay, so lastly, I want to look at this article here. This shows the connection between the Reconstruction era, which is 1865 and 1877, in a period that we deal with in the class, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. But this talks about this article here from Time magazine that came out January 12, 2022. This deals with how the history of Reconstruction is being incorrectly taught in schools all across the country. A new report finds that 45 states are failing to teach students about the period that shaped race relations after the Civil War. A new report finds that 45 states out of 50, okay, are failing to teach students about the period that shaped race relations after the Civil War. This is by Olivia B. Waxman, January 12, 2022, for Time magazine, time.com. In the aftermath of the insurrection a year ago, the January 6, 2021 insurrection is cited by Benedict Donald, the traitor-in-chief, okay? In the aftermath of the insurrection a year ago at the U.S. Capitol, many leading historians drew parallels between the violence that we saw January 6, 2021, and the Reconstruction era, 1865 to 1877. The period of political revolution, directly following the American Civil War. Quote, the events, historian Eric Foner said, the events we saw reminded me very much of the Reconstruction era and the overthrow of Reconstruction, which ends in 1877, which was often accompanied or accomplished, I should say, by violent assaults on elected officials. Eric Foner is a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and author of the book Reconstruction, America's Unfinished Revolution, 1863 to 1877. He said this in an interview with the New Yorker, published a week after the January 6, 2021 insurrection. We saw these domestic terrorists storming the U.S. Capitol building, assaulting over 140 police officers, talking about hang Mike Pence. Some of them erected gallows outside. They were looking to do harm to members of of Congress, okay? Violent assaults on elected officials. This is what we saw during the Reconstruction era. All right, now scholars are studying the aftermath. Scholars say studying the aftermath of the Civil War can help put in context many of the most seminal events in U.S. recent years, from the brutal murder of George Floyd by police in 2020 to the voter suppression laws enacted by black voters, enacted after black voters played a big role in helping Joe Biden and Kamala Harris be elected president and vice president in 2020. But despite the timeliness of the eras, despite the timeliness of the era in today's climate, many students in American schools will not get a full education of Reconstruction until they get to college, because it's not taught in most schools. 45 out of 50 states are not teaching, are failing to teach students about Reconstruction. Okay, so read this article here from time.com, Time magazine. And then when you look at what took place in 1890 at the Mississippi State Convention, this is why you needed a Voting Rights Act of 1965 to cancel out what Mississippi did in 1890, and South Carolina 1895, Alabama 1901, Louisiana 1898, where they imposed poll taxes and literacy tests. Where is that article here? It's a big article from the Washington Post that deals with this. Let me pull this up here. It was called the Mississippi Plan. Okay. And this became, now Florida was the first state to have poll taxes in 1889. Then Mississippi does in 1890. This article here from the Washington Post gives you an overview of this. The Mississippi Plan to keep blacks from voting in 1890. We came here to exclude the Negro. This is from May 1st, 2021. And Solomon Saladin Calhoun was the white county judge who presided over this state convention. And he said, let's tell the truth if it burst the bottom of the universe. He said, we came here to exclude the Negro. Nothing short of this will answer. African Americans were the majority of the population in Mississippi at the time. And these white supremacists, they wanted to rewrite the state constitutions to impose poll taxes and literacy tests to suppress African American voters, to keep us from voting and largely keep us from registering to vote, because you had to then pay a tax like $2 or whatever it was to register to vote. Okay. And then they're going to, the African Americans that we got elected into the state legislatures, things like this, they're going to get knocked out. They get voted out of office. We see this across the South. Okay. So they talk about the, Solomon Saladin Calhoun. Delegates eventually adopted a literacy test and poll tax geared to suppress the black vote in the state with a black majority. The Mississippi Plan became the model throughout the South, part of a raft of racially oppressive Jim Crow laws that ended Reconstruction. Reconstruction ended before 1890 when this took place. Reconstruction ended before 1890 when this took place. But we're going to see things like this take place after Reconstruction ends, okay? And to reverse the advancements that we were making. All right, so if you like, how's everybody doing today? Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like if you like this broadcast. If you want to learn more about this type of information, this is what we deal with in the 10-week online class that I teach on Sundays, 2 p.m., normally 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to jump in and teach this class now. We're running later today, and I have to do my radio show at 9 p.m. on Sunday. From the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. We started in 1803 with the Haitian Revolution and the Louisiana Purchase. We deal with history chronologically up through 1968. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power Movement, Great Migration, World War I, World War II, civil rights movement, Black Power movement. Okay. And some of the slides I showed you are from the presentation. I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, articles, video clips, all of that. You can use this information with your children. I would say the information is PG-13. It's not overly graphic. I don't do a lot of cursing, etc. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. We just had this session here of the class just started up really last week. So we do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded, so you can go back and watch it anytime. And a year from now, 2 years from now, you can go back and watch the entire class. Okay, so we do this normally Sundays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, on Saturdays, the class that I teach is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, where they didn't teach you in school. So we had a great class on Saturday. This course just started up also. That one's on sale, $80, regularly $130. It's the same format, PowerPoint presentation, book references, articles, video clips, what we do with thousands of years of history. If you've taken any of my online classes in the past, email me at ahnshow@africanhistorynetwork.com. You'll get a 50% discount. Okay, email me at ahnshow@africanhistorynetwork.com if you've taken any of my online classes in the past. And then also we have a course bundle pack where you get the classes that I teach. You get those in a bundle for $120. It's a $285 value. So you get a discount on that. Okay, so we have all that at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, so you can check that out there. You can register for the class. We have the information here in the thread of the broadcast, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement of Black Power, 1865 to 1968. Also, if you like this type of information as well, you want to support us, $ the AHN Show through Cash App. $ the AHN Show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show. That helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, broadcast our radio show, also the African History Network show. And I'm on 9-10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF on Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have the information here for Cash App and PayPal. This is our official Cash App account, $ the AHN Show, SHOW. When you go to it, it says Michael and shows my picture there. These other ones here are fake African History Network Cash App accounts I'm trying to get shut down. Cash App is already, I contacted Cash App. They've already opened up an investigation because there are these and a couple of other ones out there that are stealing money from us, and they're scamming, pretending to be the African History Network. We have our link here, and then the yellow PayPal donate button also. And then information here about my radio show. I've been doing radio 12 years, 6 years on 9-10 a.m. Superstation WFDF on Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We broadcast on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, when we're live. So follow us there, turn on live notifications, so you know when we go live. You can also listen on 9-10 a.m. Superstation WFDF here in Detroit, or download the iHeartRadio app and search for the African History Network show. Or search for 9-10 a.m. You can listen live, or search for the African History Network show, because they have about 300 of them audio podcasts there. Okay, look, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Be sure to register for this class and the other ones. We'll see you in class and see you on the radio. Right now, it's correct wrong behavior. Behavior is not over till we win. Wakanda forever, and we'll talk to you next time. Peace. Right now, it's correct wrong behavior is not over till we win.